Welcome to Music and Medicine. Welcome to Music and Medicine. Welcome to Music and Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Moshe Lewis. Welcome to Music and Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Moshe Lewis. I'm very ecstatic, very delighted to be joining Andreao Herb, better known as Fanatic, music producer, executive producer from the East Coast. We're out here out west, and he's bringing us his flavor. Harold's from North Carolina, but tells us he's now currently in DC. This man has worked with everybody, going back to Diddy, Mace, Lil Kim. You've heard him. He did stuff with Will Smith. I mean, and he continues to put out hits, worked with people like Beyonce. So we are very honored, much props. Thanks so much for fitting us into your schedule, young man.
No doubt, man. Glad to be here. I actually live in California, actually. I'm just on the East Coast on business. And yeah, man, I'm glad to be a part of this. I know this is an important conversation. Anytime we can share the information to help others get through this thing called life,
Yes, absolutely.
It's so important.
So we're about dropping knowledge. Absolutely. Well, sometimes we definitely record in studios in LA. So maybe we can do, part two with some artists and things like that out there. I like rolling back the hands of time and looking at how you got started. I'm from New York myself, and I know you kind of rolled up there a bit when you first got started working with Diddy's crew. Talk to us about sort of those early years and your first entree into music, even before you met and worked with him.
Actually, me and my partner, Eli Davis, who now currently manages Anthony Hamilton, we would just jump in the car on the weekends and we would drive to New York City. And, we were working these jobs, these little meaningless jobs in North Carolina. So we only had a couple of days. So we would work third shift where we'd have 3 or 4 days off a week where we would shoot to New York City, run into industry parties, networking in the studio, just moving around New York City and trying to connect with whoever we could and then come right back to work again. And then eventually we were able to run into Biggie and on Rivera and get on this Lil Kim record by hanging out in front of the Hit Factory where everybody hangs out at, and we were able to get in the door.
Sure, absolutely. So you're very modest about it, but from some of those that only spend their time on the left coast, about how long of a drive is it from North Carolina?
Oh my gosh,
and
that's like a 9-hour drive up 85, and back during that time. The cops weren't so generous when we saw a car with 3 or 4 black guys coming up the highway. We were getting pulled over, getting searched, all these different things. They were kind of like targeting young black males at that time as hip hop was really taking off. So it wasn't always a pleasant trip there, but also just being there in New York City and coming from the South. You're in the Bronx, you're in Newark, New Jersey, you're in Harlem, and all these places that is almost culture shock, because those are some really rough areas at the time with the crack and the crack epidemic that was happening and the drug dealers and things like that. So you had to really I wouldn't suggest that to my son, going up there. But during the time we were so focused and driven to make it in the music business, we were kind of like oblivious to all of the dangers of being in New York City,
Absolutely. No, definitely. Appreciate you kind of sharing that a little bit, because again, it's not down the block, and the whole DWB movement is definitely more than needs to stop. It still hasn't really fully stopped.
Right.
Tell us about some of those first steps, though, because it's so hard for people to get into the game and things like that. And I got the sense in learning about your background that you were really willing to pay those dues, pay homage, of course, to those who come before you, and were willing to kind of put in the work, as part of I could almost call it like street team guerrilla marketing, to be out there and promoting, producing, and things of that nature, artists that were still on the come up. Talk to us about some of those initial things that you were actually, doing and kind of what it looked like. Because I think a lot of times people feel like it's just this glamorous, like, wow, I met a soon-to-be superstar or a person who's well on their way, and it was just sad. I was their manager.
No, not at all. A lot of no's, a lot of doors being shut in your face. Really learning the art of establishing rapport with artists and entertainers was a big thing about it. Just really trying to figure that out because they have people approach them every day looking for opportunities. So, you know, more than anything, it was just about really learning that process of establishing rapport, like walking up to an artist and having that conversation with them and them being open to what you were into. For me, I always put in my phone, I did like a lot of research. So if it was, let's say, LL Cool J or somebody like that, right? I would study what they're into and what's going on at the time. I know with Nas, I would study like, okay, what just happened in his career? Sure. And I would make notes of it in my phone. So when I would run into these people that I wanted to see, I would look them up and I'm like, okay, Nas just did a record with this person and he has this type of campaign going on or whatever. So that when I would approach him, I would have something to say in reference to that, which immediately opened up the door for conversation to happen. And those are when the opportunities happen. So doing that as well as 6 degrees of separation was like a huge thing for me. Like it's so important to be able to connect the dots because everybody knows somebody that knows somebody in the music business. Exactly. And when you take that approach, you can figure out how to get to these people. And my thing is like every artist that I probably ever worked with was 6 degrees of separation, whether it was Michael Jackson, whether it was Beyonce, whether it was Will Smith or Lil Kim or Biggie or Puffy, it was just 6 degrees of separation. So I came up and Vincent Herbert discovered me. He brought me to Newark, New Jersey. And that's when I really started really diving in and really figuring out how to move around in these industry parties, how to move around in these studios and where these people were hanging out at so that you could interact with them and establish rapport.
Sure. And what were your sort of short term, and then we could deal with sort of more long term goals? Was it always, I want to be able to have a cadre of artists, I want to executive produce, I really want to be at the board and mixing? What were your goals?
At that time, it was just to produce a record on somebody that was emerging in the hip hop scene at the time. For me, I would make all of these tracks at home. When I used to work third shift at a hotel, Super 8 hotel. I was a third shift desk clerk. So I would work to 7 a.m., but then get sleep to 12. And then from 12 noon to about 11 o'clock at night every night, I would just make beats all day long and just made sure that I had a plethora of music to present to these executives and artists and people that I wanted to get my music on. So it was just about really being prepared. And at that time, my goal was to just try to place as many records on as many artists as possible. I hadn't thought about executive producing, doing a label, being an artist, and none of that. My whole goal was to try to be one of the biggest producers that was in the game at the time.
Sure. Now, tell us about sort of that first, you almost feel like it was a big break. Like you said, you came under Vincent's wing and things of that nature, but it's still a big step from joining a team, so to speak, and being a satellite site to actually getting your name in the credits.
Right. Well, it was a guy, like when Eli and I used to come back and forth to New York, there was a guy that we knew by the name of Sincere Thompson who did record street promotions at various labels, and he would let us stay with him. And him being from New York, he knew everybody. Everybody knew him. He knew everybody. So one day he told us that we told him that we went by the Hit Factory and we saw everybody, like a who's who was going up in the Hit Factory recording at the time. And that was like the main hangout. So we would, at the time, Puffy had the studio locked down, Devontae from Jodeci had the studio locked down, Rodney Jerkins had it locked down. So we would see all these people coming in there as we were walking by the studio in the afternoon, like maybe 5, 6 o'clock. So we told Sincere about it. And he said, if you see Rivera and Biggie, tell them you know me and they'll let you come up and play music for them. And sure enough, maybe a couple of days later, we were at the Hit Factory hanging out in front, waiting for the SUVs to pull up. And sure enough, Biggie jumps out of the car, jumps out of the car. We tell him that. He's like, come upstairs. He knew Sincere. So we go upstairs and we start playing music for him. And that's how we ended up on the Lil Kim record. And, you know, the rest was history. The next day, he picked out like 9 or 10 tracks from me. And then for the next week, we were in the studio every day with Mace, Biggie, Cameron, and Lil Kim and Lil C's just making music. And that's where the Crush on You record came from.
Sure. Talk to us about sort of that process and sort of what you felt you learned, but also what you brought to the table. Because I think a lot of people may not also realize the work, the hours, they like to say the 10,000 hours that gets put into ultimately not only making an album, but in terms of making a song a hit.
Well, we spent a lot of the production I did at home back in North Carolina in my bedroom, just making the, excuse me, just making the track, making sure the track was arranged properly, making sure that it was making sure the track was arranged properly, and making sure that everything that I wanted to present was ready to go. So by the time I saw them, all they had to do was hear the music, think about what they wanted to put on top of it as far as lyrics, and just go in the studio and just lay it down. So that whole process I learned, from Biggie, who had such a great executive mind on what tracks to pick, what choruses to put on them. A lot of this was coming from him working with Puffy and really understanding how Puffy was making records. And he picked up on it very fast. So he was able to guide Junior Mafia and this Lil Kim record to where it needed to be, because he was very on top of his vision of what he wanted to do and who he wanted to bring in to be a part of this record. And I learned a lot about executive producing from that in terms of making records. Of course, originally I was mentored by Biz Markie as well on the production side, but a lot of that came into play when I started working with Biggie and really just understanding his process on the tracks that he selected, the choruses and the familiar choruses from older R&B and soul records that he was adding to the records, and just the concepts of the songs. Like, just really a really great visionary.
Sure. And I thought you brought up a really great concept in terms of his executive producing skills and his ability to pick up very quickly. And then, like you said, ultimately seeing him as a visionary. In what ways do you feel like he was misunderstood?
Well, the thing about Biggie is, like, they just thought that he was a rapper. And Biggie, at the end of the day, was a great executive by not only navigating his career, but also thinking about Junior Mafia and what was missing in the industry at that time, because there weren't a lot of groups at that time also. So just putting that group together and understanding who were the standouts in the group and who had the charisma and the ability to go to the next level, and being able to pull them out of the groups and put them into a solo situation, knowing when to be on the records as a feature on the records, but not necessarily carrying those artists. So, a lot of times he was making the right decisions, like on the Crush on You record, instead of him actually rapping on the record, he just did the chorus on the record, which was still a big part of him being on the record, but it wasn't necessarily him carrying the record. So Lil Kim and Lil C's were able to rhyme on that record and really hold their own down. So people respected them and their ability to rap as well. And so it wasn't just like, a situation where, say, like Jay-Z and the Mill, where Jay-Z is mostly carrying the record.
Right, absolutely. Tell us about a touching moment or a memory that you have that you feel like you'll always carry with you in that first set of experiences or working with Biggie.
Well, just for him, it was just a lot of times you have a lot of downtime as you're just creating, and just hearing his conversation. And he admired a lot of artists from the South that I would never have known that. There were artists in our crew. There was a female artist in our crew by the name of Tice, who he was really into and thought was really great. And it was just interesting because I was instrumental in developing her and helping her actually come out as an artist. So it was just interesting how this was an artist that I was working with. I almost introduced her into the industry by producing her first records, sculpting and developing her. And then at the same time, here's Notorious B.I.G. that knew of the artist, was really digging the artist. And so it was just a really interesting conversation that he knew of this person that I had been, very instrumental in bringing to the hip hop community. So it was just really interesting to hear him say that, that he really dug somebody that I was a big part of.
Right. What was that next step where you felt like, gosh, I've definitely been moving forward and this is definitely, I've arrived?
It was probably, I want to say, the Beyonce moment when I produced the record Speechless for her Dangerously in Love album. This was like her first introduction as a solo artist coming out of Destiny's Child. There was a lot of pressure. This was a big moment. Her dad was really involved with A&R in the album. The record that they chose for me to do on her was the first time she had ever been singing about an encounter with an individual. It was like an erotic experience. Most of her records before that were just about love. Right. And this one was the first time she was expressing herself as a woman, right. Speaking on an experience with a man. So this was like a pivotal moment, a very pivotal moment in her career as she's coming into her own as a woman and as a solo artist. And that record, to this day, a lot of people speak about that record, talk about what that record meant to them at the time, experiences with that record, whether it be romantic experiences or just singing that record in college and things like that. So it was a big moment for me because it was so unexpected. And then she won the Grammy. Hearing your name when she's on that Grammy stage, shouting out your name was so unexpected. But I knew from the conversations when I would run into her, how impactful that record was for her, right. and her maturity and her growth as an artist. And I know it meant something very special to her. And then seeing her perform it live and it come to life, like it's just something that really stands out to me as a moment. Like, you are now officially in the game, because this is an artist that is going to be an icon that we'll talk about forever. Sure. And you were a part of her progression.
Right, and her success to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate your modesty. Talk to us about how somebody even begins to make transitions from that, because so many times this is, like you said, something that people live for, and then to accomplish it, but then move on, it can be very difficult to figure out what are those next steps, what do I do next, and how do I not do too much so I don't get too scattered.
Right. Well, for me, I had produced, I just had a really good run where I was producing a lot of records. I was doing a lot of soul music, but I was mixing influences from Prince and Michael Jackson and all these different artists that I really admired their music. So I was doing a good fusion of soul music that was a lot different than what a lot of people were doing. And with that, and a lot of it was very guitar heavy because I was working with Sherrod Barnes at the time, and we were co-producing a lot of this stuff together. So we had developed a signature sound. We developed a way of speaking to each other in terms musically on what we wanted to create and the signatures, and it just started growing so that, we were studying the Ozzy Brothers, so you would hear those influences in the record. So I was just really immersed in soul music, classic soul music at that time. So I was bringing a lot of that into the music. So we produced everybody. And I did records on Boyz II Men, Anthony Hamilton, Will Smith, Lil Kim, Biggie, Michael Jackson, all of these different people. Right. And I was able to become a part of their career when they were making a transition or they were being introduced into the next phase of their career. Be it Lil Kim coming out of Junior Mafia, whether it Beyonce coming out of Destiny's Child. Michael Jackson hadn't recorded in 10 years. And this was the first album that he was actually back in the studio working on. And so just all those records were very instrumental in their career. Anthony Hamilton with a pop record. But most of all, I went through all of that. And then I was sort of unfulfilled at what was next, because I wasn't finding, there was a lot of politics in this business when it comes to producing records. It's 9:30. Because you're dealing with situations where you may have the best record on the album, but you're dealing with other producers on the album that may have a bigger name to you, bigger name than you. So what happens is they're paying so much for these producers to be on these records that they have to make this record the single. These names are so big, and the money that they're paying and these producer fees are so big, Swiss Beats or Timbaland or Pharrell of them are going to get the single over you, whether it's yours or not. So at that time, I realized that I'm not controlling the music. I have no control or no say-so over the music once I deliver the music to the artist. So that's when I started transitioning into the artist space, where I knew if I write this record, I can decide which record will be the single, what did I wanted to focus on, what did I want to produce, promote, or put the video to.
Right. And did you sense that that was a really big pivot, or like you said, that you'd worked with some artists before you even essentially really moved up to the New York area? It was really sort of just returning to something you were very familiar with.
I never really thought about being an artist. I had been a lot of people had mentioned that you should be the artist, because what was happening, I was producing a lot of young artists from back home,
Right.
and every time we would get to the finish line or in the red zone when we're about to score, whether we got the deal or we're trying to get the deal and things didn't, things didn't pan out, they bailed, and they lost, they quit. And so for me, doing this for so long, I've received so many no's or whatever, but nothing ever stopped me, and nothing, deterred me from continuing my drive and my passion to do this. Because I always felt like if you got in the door before, it's not impossible to get in there again. You just have to keep trying until you find the right way to go. And so I never quit. So all these artists were quitting on me, and I was devoting so much time to developing them and producing them, and then they would quit. So I was just like, I mean, you have the information, you're developing them. You've been mentored by Puffy, Vincent Herbert, Omar Rambert from Overbrook, all of these people that are huge on artist development. So you learn from the best. You produce all of these iconic artists. So you learn something from being in the studio with Beyonce or Michael Jackson or Anthony Hamilton or all these different artists. So it's like, you basically have went to college and learned all this. So why not apply it to yourself? Because you know what the drive that you have inside of you is. You know you're not going to quit on your dreams. You know you're going to be relentless, and you're going to keep going. So at that point, I realized it was time to move into another space as an artist. The pandemic happened, and that was the moment where everything stopped, and I was able to like really focus on my artistry, where you're in the house 24/7, recording, writing, and finding a direction for your music.
Sure, absolutely. And tell us sort of about some of the more current projects and things like that, that sort of cathartic moment, so to speak.
The best thing that happened is when the pandemic happened, I moved back home to be with my mother and my father that are much older, and I was able to take care of them. But at the same time, I was able to really find purpose in my career. And I went home and I did a master class that I had been putting off for months, almost a year. And I just, at the spare of the moment, I was just like, I should just do this master class, because I always have a lot of insight from things that I went through in the industry. I almost have a testimonial of all of these ups and downs that I experienced. And like I said, I was producing artists that couldn't make it, or couldn't deal with the ups and downs of the business. So I was like, I need to be a voice to them so that they can understand what they're getting into, how to navigate through the business. So we created the Culture Pushers, and that's like a nonprofit that really helps artists navigate through the business. We give them insight. We help them partner with different brands and corporations and things like that will give them the resources and the information on how to continue to make it. And we all know somebody that evidently has the gift, from up above, that quit on their dreams because it got too difficult to get through the business. Right. So when I went home, I discovered purpose, and I did this master class, and so many people were receptive to it. I was like, that's my calling. And I really understood that like everything that I do moving forward has to have purpose attached to it. It has to be something that has been very difficult for other artists to do, but you're able to do it and be that example to other artists. So when I discovered Billie Lennox, I started, which is the artist that I go by now, and it's a Black artist. I'm a Black artist doing rock and roll, which is very you don't really see that right now, in music. They've kind of segregated us to hip hop and R&B, and haven't let us paint or color outside of that line. So and every time we do, we become iconic. You can go all the way back to Little Richard and Chuck Berry, and come all the way forward to Prince and Lenny Kravitz, Andre 3000, Nerd, all of these amazing artists of color that created in the rock and roll space and became iconic. So that's what's missing right now. So I feel like, if I'm able to do that, then I can inspire other artists to do the same thing, because now we feel like we have opportunity. We're being accepted in that space. And just Black people alone, we just do something very unique in our expression, whether it's our fashion, our sexuality, our stage performance, our lyrics, the music, everything that encompasses our DNA, we put into that music, and we do it like nobody else.
Absolutely, no doubt. Um, what are some challenges that you feel, however poetic you need to be about it, that you felt like this is something important for people to understand? This is just the way it is. You covered one of them, so to speak, with respect to maybe not always getting the single release, despite how good the song may be.
Right.
Did you feel are important for younger people in terms of their experience in the business may need to understand, or that you learned?
Yeah, for me, it's just this whole business in general is just difficult. You know, it's a lot of no's, but you're always 1 second away from that yes. Be it and that's what I love about this business. I can't really get this anywhere else, where every day that you wake up, you're one email, text message, or phone call away from the opportunity that can change your life. So for me, I always love this about this business, and it's always changing. And one thing that I learned more than anything is that, you know, we always have an end goal that we're reaching for that is really hard to attain, but there are so many small victories along the way, you know, and we have to learn to celebrate those. I always consider those like a brick in the wall when you're building the house, and we have to find joy in those moments versus always focusing on the big picture of, you know, success, getting the record deal, success, money, all of these different things. Focus on those little things, because those little things will lead you to that. And whenever you feel like it's not moving as fast as you wanted to, look back at your career 6 months ago and think about where you were and the people that you knew and the access that you had and the information. Right. And that and studying is the biggest thing for me. I study artists past and present, and always just look at their process and their story and their journey. And you can always take something from every artist that was iconic before and pull something and fuse it into what you're doing. And that's how, if you look at those superstar artists from back in the day, they all had bits and pieces of people that came before them. So I'm a big advocate on studying those greats that came before you.
Sure. No, absolutely. I love it. We talked about your special memory of Biggie. What's another story or an artist that you really feel like, gosh, I grew an inch that day or a mile. I grew in the experience that I had with them and that I'll carry with me?
Oh, well, definitely the Michael Jackson experience, because of course you grow up on Michael Jackson. He was one of my first musical influences in the Jackson 5, and seeing what they were doing. And I remember as a kid standing in the mirror, emulating him and singing, and just like, it was such a magical moment and a big part of my childhood. And then as he grew into a solo artist. So, you know, you never really think that you're ever going to run into Michael Jackson or have any type of encounter with him. And so when I work with like three or four other producers on this record, writers and producers on this record. And when I first got the track, I knew this sounded like Michael Jackson. Like, it just felt like Michael Jackson to me. So I went out and found the writer, that Teron Beal, that I had, and the Ritza Laws, that I knew could really capture the essence of Michael Jackson and what this record sounded like to me, because it reminded me of Lady in My Life. I know Michael hadn't done a record about a woman in that regard in a very long time. A lot of his records were more from the humanitarian space. So I was like, this is a chance for me to create a record that it will be a staple in the Black community moving forward, where you're going to hear this record forever on the Quiet Storm. People will make babies to this record. They will have romantic encounters to this record, and it will be one of the records that will always stand out in his career as a ballad. So I did the record Heaven Can Wait on him. And you know, just meeting him, you know, it's just like, it's so surreal when, you know, you've seen this guy on TV, you've seen him go through all these iconic moments, and then he's standing like 2 feet in front of you and you're having a conversation with you. And then it just dawns on you like, this is Michael Jackson. And you know, I'm from Greensboro, North Carolina. I don't know anybody that's ever met him from there or even had any type of conversation with him. And the beauty of it was, it wasn't just hi and bye like most people have with him. This was like a real conversation about the music, he's looking you right in your eyes. You're feeling his spirit in the room, and you know, like he is not of this earth. You get that feeling when he's in there, and then at the same time, you see the sincerity in his voice. You hear the humility, and immediately everything that you've ever heard about him, all of that stuff goes out the window because now you're really interacting with this person, and you can feel his vibe. And so all of the rumors and all of this stuff goes away because you're like, I can feel who this person really is at the core and in the soul. So, you know, it was just a really, really surreal moment for me to really experience that and to be a part of that moment in history.
You raise a great point that comes up all the time. Is it super important for people to separate sort of this creative genius, so to speak, from the person? And one's not saying to be, forgiving of this or critical of that, but just really understanding that sort of the closer one gets into true creativity. You mentioned artists like that, Biggie and Prince and the Isley Brothers, to be fair to an artist from yesterday, and Michael and things of that nature, that it is a very difficult balance to really achieve and maintain some sense of sanity.
Oh, yes, yes, definitely. I mean, I'm a huge advocate of mental health and surviving the traumas of the record business and fame. We've seen so many people crash right in front of us, burn and crash because of what fame and success does to you. I mean, when you really think about it, it's about this adulation that happens at such a high level, and then when it's over, it just disappears. So what ends up happening is, and artists are very fragile, very sensitive. We're very transparent in putting our everything out on the line for people to judge and have an opinion about. And the thing about it is, everybody doesn't make it through that process. Very few of us make it through that process. And it's just, I just know we experience a lot of trauma from the music business, and I haven't really seen too many artists get out okay. And when you talk about these artists, when you talk about Michael Jackson, when you talk about Prince, these are artists that, were totally against drugs and all of this stuff. But you see in the end, they were so consumed with being who they've always been to the public and being on cue and ready to go, that they sacrificed their lives by taking drugs and making sure that they could get up to do it over and over again for us when we called on them. So, and there's trauma in that as well, so a lot of us don't really get out alive, and a lot of us suffer from all of the ups and downs of the music business. So I'm a big advocate of mental health and making sure that we take care of that, because we have to protect these artists. They give their gift of music to us, and it's sound, like they say, the soundtrack of our lives. Like we experience it all day, every day. It takes us through various moods and situations, and time stamps many moments in our lives. So we have to protect them and make sure that they're okay.
Absolutely. No, you've developed a lot of insight for your few years. And so that's great segue to this last question of, when you hear those words, music and medicine, which is the name of our show, what does that mean to you? How does that speak to you?
It just shows me when I hear that slogan, to me, it's almost like I understand the power of music. Music just has the ability to do so much for us. And a lot of times we take that for granted, and the messages that we put in the music and the things that we put out. And I just feel like a lot of artists take that for granted now, because we're so in this capitalist space of trying to make a hit record, trying to make all this money, versus understanding the gift of music and how important it is and how it can change people's lives. And so when I'm going in the studio and I'm making records, I'm always very conscious about that power and that obligation I have to heal people through music. And, whether it's creating a mood that is celebratory, whether it is bringing them out of a dark space, whether it is celebrating a special occasion, all of these different things are so important that we have to be very careful about the messages that we're putting out there. And we have to make sure that we are responsible enough to use music in a way that it can heal people, because it's like we take it for granted, but it is very, very powerful, and it can reach anybody. It breaks down racial barriers, all of these different things that music does. We have to really take in account of how important it is that we get the message out there through the music. We saw it big in the 60s and the 70s with the civil rights movement and things like that were going on culturally. So these are things that, music was a part of. So we can use it in almost any context to really help us, heal the world, basically.